Helmut Wick was born in 1915 in Mannheim, a city sitting along the Rhine River. His childhood looked ordinary from the outside. He spent his early years moving from place to place as his father searched for work, carrying the family from Germany to Switzerland and back again. What he carried with him, though, was a strong interest in flying. Aviation in the 1920s still had the shine of a new magic trick, and kids like Wick saw pilots as people who had grabbed hold of the sky with their bare hands. As he grew older, that interest solidified into a plan. By the time Germany was sliding toward another war, Wick knew he wanted to fly for a living. When the Nazi government pushed forward with its rearmament in the 1930s, the Luftwaffe became the path for anyone who wanted to fly military aircraft. Wick joined in 1936 and trained as a fighter pilot. The training was strict, fast, and demanding. He learned not only how to control nimble, high-powered aircraft, but also how to read a sky full of threats and decide in seconds when to fight or flee. In these early years, Wick built a reputation as a disciplined and ambitious young pilot. By 1939, war had begun. Wick was assigned to Jagdgeschwader II, a fighter wing named after the early German ace Boelke. His initial missions came during the period jokingly called the Phony War, when fighting remained limited and both sides mostly watched each other from a distance. Wick did not stay idle for long. Once Germany launched its attack on France in 1940, his unit entered active combat. The skies over France became his classroom, one filled with danger and quick lessons. He scored his first victories there, and his commanders took note of his growing technical skill and sharp eyesight. The fall of France brought a new phase of air war. With Britain refusing to surrender, Germany prepared to break its defenses through a massive air campaign. This became known as the Battle of Britain, and Wick stepped into it at a moment when the Luftwaffe felt confident. German leaders believed their fighter pilots would clear the skies of British defenders. Pilots like Wick were expected to help carry that plan. Wick flew the Messerschmitt Bf 109, a fast, narrow-winged fighter with strong climbing power and heavy guns. The aircraft had its weaknesses, but in the hands of a skilled pilot it could be deadly. The air battles over Britain were fast, chaotic, and exhausting. Wick fought through them again and again, sometimes flying multiple missions in a single day. He became known for an aggressive but controlled fighting style. Reports from those around him described him as calm in the cockpit, able to track enemy aircraft with an almost instinctive sense of timing. As his victory tally increased, Wick's superiors promoted him rapidly. By the middle of 1940, he had risen to command positions despite his young age. His success made him valuable to Nazi propaganda, which was hungry for symbols of strength at a time when the war was not going as smoothly as hoped. Wick appeared in newspapers and newsreels, turned into a public figure, presented as the image of the perfect fighter pilot. That spotlight disturbed some fellow pilots, who saw him as talented but worried that fame might cloud his judgment or add pressure no one could handle in such a deadly job. The nature of aerial combat made every day unpredictable. One mission could feel routine, and the next could scatter pilots across the sky in life-or-death spirals. Wick followed orders and led his men, but the war around him was shifting. The Luftwaffe struggled to destroy British air defenses. Losses climbed. Britain's resilience, supported by radar networks and home-field logistics, proved far stronger than German strategy expected. Though Wick continued to score victories, the tide of the air war no longer bent easily in Germany's favor. In only a few months, Wick became one of the highest-scoring Luftwaffe aces. At 25 years old, he was younger than many of the pilots he commanded. He was awarded high military honors by the Nazi regime, honors that tied him publicly to its propaganda machine. His personal life changed too. He married in 1940, and he and his wife welcomed a son later that year. Letters he wrote home showed the strain of balancing pride in his flying record with fear, fatigue, and the growing weight of responsibility for his squadron. Late in 1940, Wick was promoted to command an entire fighter wing. This placed him in charge of hundreds of pilots during some of the most intense months of the air war. His methods included strict discipline and a belief in leading from the front. Instead of staying on the ground and directing operations from safety, Wick often flew missions himself. This exposed him to the same dangers his men faced, and some argued it was unwise for a wing commander to take such risks. But Wick insisted, believing that he could not demand from others what he was unwilling to do. The battlefields he flew across were not just stretches of sky. Below them lived civilians moving through air raids, cities shaken by bombs, and families huddled in shelters. This wider human cost is part of any honest telling of the story. While pilots such as Wick saw themselves in the narrow frame of combat, they also served a government responsible for destructive campaigns and atrocities across Europe. Wick did not choose the larger goals of the war, but he participated in it as a dedicated officer of the Air Force that helped carry out the Nazi government's ambitions. By November 1940, Wick was at the height of his fame. German news agencies pushed his image even harder as the so-called hero pilot. That same month, the struggle between the RAF and the Luftwaffe remained fierce despite the official end of the main phase of the Battle of Britain. Patrols, interceptions, and raids continued. Both sides remained deadly. On November 28, 1940, Wick led a mission across the English Channel. His group encountered British fighters near the Isle of Wight. A violent dogfight broke out, and Wick shot down an enemy aircraft. Moments later, he became the target. A British pilot closed in behind him. Wick's Bf-109 took fatal hits. Witnesses reported seeing his aircraft dive toward the sea. Wick bailed out, but the cold November water swallowed him quickly. Rescue teams searched, but his body was never recovered. His death rippled through the Luftwaffe. Some felt the loss of a skilled commander. Others wondered whether his celebrity status had pushed him into risks a more seasoned leader might have avoided. His family received the news quietly, away from the propaganda machine that had turned him into a symbol. The Nazi leadership used his death for further publicity, but the real impact lived in the people who knew him personally: his wife, his newborn son, his fellow pilots who had flown with him in dangerous skies. Looking at Wick's life today means seeing the layers that shaped him. He was a talented pilot shaped by his era's military culture, ambitious enough to rise quickly through the Luftwaffe's ranks. His technical skill was genuine, but so was the destructive purpose he served. The world he lived in was propelled by an ideology that cast entire nations as targets. His story is not one of simple heroism or villainy. Instead, it shows how individual lives become intertwined with the machinery of war, sometimes lifted high, and sometimes shattered by it. Wick's legacy remains complicated. His flying achievements are recorded in military history, but they cannot be separated from the regime he represented. Studying him means acknowledging both his personal abilities and the larger context that gave those abilities their shape. It means understanding the danger of turning soldiers into public symbols without recognizing what they are fighting for. It means remembering how young many of these pilots were, and how quickly their lives were consumed by a conflict driven by leaders who cared little for the people caught in it. In the end, Helmut Wick's story reflects the tragic momentum of the Second World War. A young man with talent and ambition stepped into a role that placed him at the center of a violent, destructive conflict. He climbed fast, reached the top, and disappeared into the cold waters of the Channel before he turned 26. His life reminds us how war can lift a person into sudden fame and then erase them just as quickly, leaving behind a mix of records, memories, and the unanswered questions that follow when someone dies so young in a cause that brought suffering to millions. Thanks for watching the story of Helmut Wick. If you have a thought on his career, drop it in a comment. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe.